And we are live.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I'm here. Surprisingly, it's better than the last stream where I just was kicked. So, hi everyone who watches. Today with us, two great American progressives. Matt Duss is ex-advisor, former advisor of Senator Bernie Sanders. He's from Ukrainian-American background and worked on solidarity with Ukraine. He visited Ukraine, I think, half a year ago, and always follows Ukrainian politics and supports us. He also navigates foreign policy discussion right now. And also we have Senator Tanya Vyhovsky, the same with Ukrainian-American background, which is very happy, who is a member of Vermont Progressive Party. And yeah, that's it. So would you tell a bit about yourself, about what you're doing right now, and how it's connected with both US elections and Ukraine? And yeah, just introduce yourself. Thank you.
Tanya, you can go first.
Okay.
I'm Tanya. And I'm a state senator here in Vermont. I do work with I am a member of the Vermont Progressive Party. I'm also a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and I have been a senator for one term. I was in the House for one term before that, and I'm currently running for re-election. I also am doing international, in addition to my state level work, I'm doing some international work with the Ukrainian Solidarity Campaign, and here in Vermont, working with some individuals in the electrical world to try and gather surplus electrical supplies to get them to Ukraine, because I do know that there is a huge need for it. So I'm doing everything I can from afar. And my dad is Ukrainian, so that is my background, my Ukrainian background, and unfortunately have not been to Ukraine ever. My brother has gone a couple times, but I've missed those opportunities, but hopefully I will be able to soon.
Very nice. Thank you.
There's a speaking of electrical flies, right? I just behind me, other shoulder, over here. Yeah, behind there, you can kind of see an EcoFlow that I have ready. We don't need it yet. By the way, my name's Jared. I'm a copy editor for a few Ukrainian publications. I live in Kyiv. But yeah, thank you for your work, Matt. How about you?
Sure, thank you, and really appreciate the invitation to come on and speak with you. And very nice to meet you, Senator. My name is Matt Duss. I'm the Executive Vice President at International Policy, which is a progressive foreign policy organization in Washington, D.C. And our project is to develop a set of progressive policy ideas, coherent vision for how progressives can engage with the policy process and develop, a more humane vision for America's role in the world. As Vlad said, previously I was a foreign policy advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders for almost 6 years, from 2017 to 2022. And then, about a year ago, actually just over a year ago, time really flies, is when I had the opportunity to travel to Ukraine with a colleague, spent some time with Vlad, took me to get some good food and drinks, great tour guide, but spent time in Kyiv and then traveled down to Odessa and wrote about that for an article in the New Republic. I had visited Ukraine once before, back in 2015, with my family and with my father, who's Ukrainian. His family are Ukrainian immigrants, came to this country in the 1950s. So that is my personal family connection to this, but we were able to visit extended family who still live there. So yeah, I mean, when it looked like the Russian invasion was going to happen, and this is late 2021 when this started to look imminent, and we were hearing, I was in the Senate with Bernie at that time. It's something he started paying very close attention to and getting briefed on and talking to a lot of people. And his, if I can kind of characterize his position, which I think generally is a very solid progressive position, which was, let's do everything possible diplomatically to avert this. But when it became clear that Putin was going forward as he did, that then transitioned to, okay, let's make sure we're doing everything we can to help Ukraine defend itself, because this is a pretty important and fundamental principle of people's right to defend themselves, their sovereignty, their independence. And so I think that is where, and I saw those values reflected in the Biden administration's policy. And I would not say that about many areas of the Biden administration's foreign policy, which I have been largely and greatly disappointed in. But I do think Ukraine, all things considered, and there are other areas I can name, but I think in general, the way they have handled, supporting Ukraine's defense has been pretty skilled and admirable.
I have immediately a question for Tanya. You said that you are a member of Democratic Socialists of America. What's the situation in the organization? Because I think there are a lot of tankies and they couldn't accept good resolution on Ukraine, how you navigate it, and what's going on in the organization, how it's to be at the same time in DSA and Vermont Progressive Party, how you navigate it, what you're doing there, and what's the positions, what's the conflict inside, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, it's actually been a really hard space to be, as a Ukrainian-American in some of those leftist spaces, because there are some really big divisions and splits. And, certainly at times I have been kind of less involved in the day-to-day just because of how difficult it is to navigate those spaces, and not in an intellectual way, but in a very real way, because I too have family in Ukraine. It's not something I'm looking at simply through a lens of what I'm reading in the news. It's something I'm looking at really personally. And those have been tough spaces to be in. I'm presently in a space where I've stepped away a little bit from the kind of day-to-day, because there is a huge split and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, other than being just a very intellectual and kind of ideological or idealist space of how they're viewing Russia, frankly. And it's really challenging to sit in that space. And certainly I know I have allies in those spaces, but I also have places where we really fall down on different sides of the issue. And I think I sometimes navigate it better than others, and try to really listen and try to bring my perspective into those spaces. And sometimes it feels near impossible. And it's difficult for me to understand how one can look at all the facts in front of them and come down on the side that some of my leftist friends are.
I'm curious, you talked about it being nearly impossible. I'm curious if you've found any, and I guess this will be brief for both of you, but I'm immediately responding to Tanya, which is, if you found anything that works. I was in a conversation yesterday with leftist Minneapolis people, where we were in similar spaces after the murder of George Floyd. And now, justifiably, they are very focused on Gaza, and I understand that. And I try to not defend the Biden administration on Palestine, while at the same time being look at the consequences for Ukraine. This is also important. And I try to come at it in a personal way, but sometimes it works, sometimes it often doesn't. And I don't know. I haven't been able to crack that code, and I'm wondering what you have done and how's it gone.
Yeah, I think I would echo that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It's really tough for me to sit, and like you said, rightfully, we need to be focused on Gaza, and so much of what we're focused on in making sure that we stop funding, weapons to Israel, and we're funding humanitarian support to Gaza. So many of the issues are so similar. And so it's very challenging for me to sit in a space where it's yes, I completely agree with you on Gaza, and I don't understand why you don't see why this is such a similar situation in Ukraine. And I think, the most successful conversations I've had have been kind of long, emotionally draining. Last year,
probably not on Facebook comments.
Probably not on Facebook comments. I regularly choose not to engage there. Last year I went with a delegation of DSA people to Cuba, and I was really, really concerned that was going to be a space where I would have to not be Ukrainian and not talk about this. And what I actually found is that in those smaller spaces, with a lot of time over this sort of shared experience of being in Cuba, that I could dive really deep into it, and found a lot of understanding and a lot of openness from that delegation to understand where I was coming from. So what I've really found is it's that personal connection and that openness to maybe seeing the world in a different way. But I certainly have not found a whole lot of success in, text conversations or big group chats or Facebook comments. It's been when I have the capacity to dig deep into the emotions of it and how it's impacting me and what I'm seeing. And, you know, I've been in Romania a couple times in the last 2 years, and being able to reflect what I'm hearing from, you know, the countries surrounding Ukraine. And when people are open to that, I've been able to shift the conversation and change minds. But it's just emotionally really draining, because it's not usually a 15 or 20-minute conversation. It's like hours over the course of days of like really diving deep and sort of laying bare everything that I'm feeling and that's going on for me and the people that I know that are living in Ukraine.
Matt,
Yes,
how about you? Sorry, just to because I think this is important to hit. How about you? How have you navigated this, and how's it gone? That balance
Well,
we were talking about.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, I recognize and have experienced some of those debates that Tanya is talking about, of course. I mean, I find that something that's really valuable and is, you know, as a progressive, the concept of solidarity is something that really like undergirds so much of my approach to foreign policy. I think it's a very, very key principle. And so, you know, when I'm having these debates, one thing I'm always, you know, trying to do is encourage my colleagues, my progressive and left colleagues, is like, make sure you're actually talking to Ukrainian progressives. If we are in solidarity with people, we need to hear from them and understand how they perceive these challenges, how they perceive. I mean, it's not just about us. I mean, yes, first of all, I'm an American. My policy recommendations are designed to, you know, to support the security and the prosperity of my country. But the way that solidarity plays into that is I want to be very mindful that, you know, these decisions do not export insecurity and poverty onto others. The United States is obviously enormously powerful. The decisions we make have very serious and immediate consequences around the world. So let's be mindful of that. And I think, but also part of the challenge here is, you know, working in, you know, the kind of dominant political narrative, including by the President of the United States, shared from the Oval Office, is that Ukraine and Israel are the same, and that supporting both of these is the same. And I said and wrote at the time, and will continue to say, that I find that both dishonest and inaccurate, and frankly offensive. You know, Russia is occupying Ukraine. Russia wants to erase Ukraine's independence. Israel is occupying Palestine. It wants to prevent Palestinian independence. Now, there are obviously differences within these two conflicts, for sure. That is, of course, not to defend at all what occurred on October 7th. But there is just no, I mean, again, it's just been wild to see politicians condemn in the strongest language, as they should, you know, cutting off food, electricity, water, besieging civilian, you know, cities when Russia's doing it, and say nothing, if not outright support it, when Israel is doing that exact same thing. And I think this has been just so, first of all, it complicates the argument that I think I and others have been trying to make here. But I also think it just severely undermines the whole concept of a set of shared international rules and norms that I think we have been rightly trying to uphold in Ukraine. And yet the last year plus since October 7th, we have shown with just unmistakably that this is an entirely selective way of applying the rules. They are to be, our enemies are held to these standards. Our friends get a pass, and that's not a rules-based order. That's just might makes right.
Oh,
And
Vlad,
one
I
of the
interrupted you.
challenging things I've seen, and I've certainly, to your point, is when the federal government has repeatedly tried to tie aid to Ukraine and aid to Israel together. And certainly, as I've advocated in DC for, you know, aid to Ukraine, it's been really contingent on the fact that it cannot be tied to aid to Israel. Because I think you're absolutely right in both spaces. In the leftist space, you know, being very understanding of the plight of the Gazans, but not the Ukrainians, and then in our sort of like narrative being able to, on the one hand, say we have to support Ukraine, but also Israel. Like these are so diametrically opposed views that are being linked together in both spaces.
Vlad, sorry, I interrupted your question earlier.
Yeah, so I'm interested. What do you think about now there's escalation in Ukraine? North Korean forces are fighting on the front line in Ukraine, and there are a huge number of war crimes that happened in the last months, including killing prisoners. And attacks on civilians with drones and so on. And we have rise of war crimes, and we have huge intervention of other states in this war, as well as we have different states giving Russia soldiers, such as Syria, such as Cuba. And I have a question. What the US response should be to such escalation? What do you think should be a foreign policy choice for that situation? We have limitation right now on the rocket strikes, on distance. We have different arms deliveries that are delayed. What do you think should be done after such horrendous act of escalation? And let's first Tanya and then Matt.
I mean, this sort of points to something that I've said since the very beginning of this escalation, because as many of us know, this didn't actually start in 2022. But this, for me, really points to one of the things that I've been saying, that this is not just a threat to Ukraine. It's not just a threat to Europe. It's really a threat to global democracy. And I think these escalations are really highlighting that. And as much as I am someone who wants to strive towards places where we're not using violence and war to solve our issues, and I have done a fair amount of work and both coursework and my own personal work in international restorative justice practices to really come to these spaces. That's not where we're at. And right now, I think Russia knows that they can escalate and there will be no recourse. And so I think we do need to lift the restrictions on Ukraine's ability to defend itself. And it's hard for me to say that, because I really don't sit in a space where I'm pro-war or pro-violence. And I think when there's a knowledge that there is no recourse available, people will do whatever they want to do because they believe that that's possible. And I also think that, we need to support the Hague's investigation into genocide and ethnic cleansing and all of the war crimes that are happening. I mean, I have a cousin who had drone striked while they were trying to dig out a children's hospital that was bombed. I mean, this is not acceptable engagement.
I mean, my own view is, I mean, I understand, I think, the logic behind, the Kursk incursion, in part to show for the Ukrainians to demonstrate that some of the, the West's own kind of self-deterrence and fear of Putin's, response was perhaps a bit overblown. Again, I'm someone who has, I already said, I appreciate and support the way that Biden has handled this. He's actually gotten a lot of criticism from his own hawkish right, including from some Ukrainians, that he has been too restrained and too slow in providing arms. I have yet to see, it's, obviously it's unfalsifiable, but the claim has been made that, if only he did more, sent more sooner, we could have, achieved victory. I have not really seen a plausible case made for that, but I understand why people argue it. But the bottom line is, Russia is a nuclear power. The use of tactical nuclear weapons has been discussed. We know this by the leadership. It is a threat that, like it or not, I do think we have to continue to consider. And I'm very glad the Biden administration is continuing to take it seriously. For me, the theory of the case has always been pretty sound, which is, we want to continue to support Ukraine's defense such that it could create the best possible situation for eventual negotiations to end the war. And by ending the war, I mean a durable end to war, not just a pause while Putin kind of reconstitutes his military and rearms for the next round. And as of now, I still, unfortunately, while we have seen, the kind of late summer, early fall, effort that was highly successful in, that was 2021. I'm sorry. No, it was 2022. That really, I think, boosted support in the United States, that really showed that Ukraine had really been able to assimilate the tactics, the weaponry, the equipment, and use it effectively. But since then, it's been kind of bogged down, and I see that's partially reflected in U.S. public support. Though I would say that we saw recent polls by Shibli Telhami at the University of Maryland, very well respected pollster, that showed that, despite the fact that this is more or less seems like an intractable conflict at this point, U.S. public support remains fairly solid. A majority support remains solid. So I think if Putin is kind of trying to just wait us out, which I think he cleared, that's part of his strategy, that would indicate that is not really working. Now, conversely, because of the fact that U.S. public support remains solid, that, in my view, also argues for leaning forward into diplomacy while continuing support, militarily. And I know this has been ongoing through various channels by the U.S., by our partners.
Well, I want to focus on one part of that for a second,
Yeah.
which is
Can
you
I-
used the word. Do you want to go, Flip? Sorry.
Yeah, I want to ask a bit. We have this situation where U.S. limits amount of weapons that is sent to Ukraine.
Mhm.
Ukrainian battalions have less weapons
Mhm.
and they have less successful operations. So they don't have this boost of morale to show that to international communities that they can do something. And it kind of creates this loop where there's not enough supplies and ammunitions and weapons sent to Ukraine. Because of it, there's no great offensives to show some kind of success that Ukraine can win. And because of this, it limits even more supplies and it creates this very negative loop, very negative feedback, and forces Ukrainian armed forces to go for more riskier operations to do with little more. And that's quite toxic situation. And I think it's something that happens in Kursk right now. And I think that it's very early to speak about negotiations or diplomacy. The situations that is going on, that there are horrible ethnic cleansing going on the occupation territories. There's massive battles right now. Nobody would negotiate, but we need to think about how to strengthen Ukraine power for the future negotiation for the liberation of territories. And any limits would be very toxic and would create a situation where hundreds of thousands could die. And in that, I think we need to think more boldly about military.
Well, like a
Because
concrete
it
example.
just saves people. It's just situations that
a
if
concrete.
it wouldn't be done, a lot of people would die. And I want to ask about this. How do you think these discussions about Ukraine, what's going on, Ukraine fatigue, and so on, affects U.S. politics right now? And what do you think you should how go forward? You said that Russia is nuclear state. If there wouldn't be any red lines that step up support for Ukraine, Russia wouldn't see any problems with having nuclear strike. There wouldn't be proper reaction. The situation that the US allows Russia to do everything without any stepping up in the military support, and that creates a horrible precedent where Russia just tries more and more harmful criminal acts. And I think it could go to the situation where it would feel that it would be unpunished to use nuclear weapons. So I think the situation, there's loop is opposite, that when there's limits on support, there are more situations, more positive connotations to use tactical nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction, do more war crimes, because every time that Russia does it, it checks how the world reacts, and world practically doesn't react, so they go forward.
I just wanted to say that, like, in terms of
yeah.
like a concrete example, the loop that you're talking about would be like long-range strikes on air bases. Like, they asked for them, they debated it for a long time, and then Russia moved most of its planes out of range, and then we were like, well, what's the point now? And the argument is that had we acted sooner, that would be a very clear indication of maybe there'd be less bombers right now launching cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, in that, what do you think about Ukraine victory plans that was presented by Zelensky? Let's go again, Tanya and Matt. First Tanya and then Matt.
I mean, it's so hard to. I don't think, as an American, someone who's living here, that I really have a leg to stand on to weigh in on what Ukrainians living in Ukraine and on the front lines feel is the path towards victory. I mean, this is especially as a state senator. You know, I have no impact on foreign policy, and one of the things that I've said kind of repeatedly, both around this issue and when in spaces where I'm, talking to people who maybe see things differently than me, but also, on the issue of Gaza, is the people who know best what they need and how they want to move forward are the people that are in it, not me. And so, what I say to, Zelensky's plan towards victory is he certainly knows better than I do what it is he needs and how to, move his country forward. And so from that standpoint, and when I'm not in the Senate, I'm a social worker. And so I'm very much about like self-determination, and that goes for the individual, but also, when we're talking about a country, people in Ukraine know what is needed and how they want to move towards victory in a way that I can't possibly. And so I don't feel like it's my space to really weigh in and say that the plan is wrong or the plan is because that's coming from my own viewpoint, where I'm sitting not, having my cities bombed, not having this aggression that has been ongoing for many, many years. Do I have my own thoughts and opinions, because I have family there and because I have like my own personal connection to it? Sure. But at the end of the day, I'm not living in it every day.
Yeah. Matt, how do you see, I want to take a step back for a second to something you said earlier, which is you mentioned, a durable peace. And from just reading a lot of Ukrainian media, reading a lot of Ukrainian opinion makers, and just talking to people, the thing they come back to over and over again is the piece where it's, as you alluded to, not a pause, not a pause that results in, yes, they come back in a few years, and if there's an agreement in place where Ukraine had to limit its army or agree to like a set of conditions that made them vulnerable, that they would be, by signing a peace treaty that made them that vulnerable, signing their own death warrant, if you will. Like they would be setting the stage for an occupation that would be brutal. So looking at the election, like, and in terms of what is a durable peace? Like NATO or something like it, some sort of security guarantee? Do you think that like under a Harris administration, something approaching that would be possible? How do you see it?
Let's go with Matt. Yeah.
I do think under a Harris administration, I mean, it would be possible. Now, I think there's a very live debate over NATO or a NATO-like commitment. I tend to think the latter is probably more realistic and beneficial. Happy to explain why. But if you look at her, she has talked about foreign policy relatively little. But if you look at her acceptance speech at the convention back in August, she spoke. It was relatively short speech in general. She named very few foreign policy items. There was one about winning competition with China. Another was about Israel and Palestine, and another was unequivocal support for Ukraine. That was a box that she did check. So I think she did signal that she's, all in continuing, to support Ukraine's defense. So I think, as I said, there remains public support. It's become, unfortunately, a kind of identity issue, a partisan issue, as so many things do in our broken politics here in the United States, where if the Democrats are for it, well, the Republicans must be against it. Donald Trump has said what he says. Donald Trump couldn't find it on a map, but he knows, and his argument is always, well, we're getting ripped off. And that unfortunately does have some traction, because people have what I think are very legitimate questions about, okay, why are we sending these millions and billions of dollars in weapons to this other country? There are answers to that question. But I would expect that either way, if Harris wins, I mean, I think she would continue the Biden policy, although I do think she would, probably look for opportunities diplomatically pretty soon.
Matt, I know you have to go in not too long, so before we lose the opportunity, I want to take you up on that offer of explaining why you think NATO adjacent is more realistic or good, because that is a topic that is debated not just in the U.S. but in Ukrainian spaces too.
Right. I mean, I think first of all, you have the U.S. Senate, which would have to approve it. I think that right now, given the way that this has unfortunately become a partisan issue, could be pretty tough. Now, if we're going to give a NATO-like commitment, it could require a similar Senate approval if it's going to be seen as ironclad both by Ukraine and by Russia. That remains to be seen. I do think the NATO question, you have, other members of NATO who we know are going to be a problem here. But I also think, listen, I'm someone who does not overstate the NATO the role that NATO played in Putin's decision making. I do not dismiss it. I don't think anyone should. I disagree with my colleagues who insist that, oh, if we only hadn't expanded NATO, this wouldn't be happening. I think the reasons for what Putin did, as he himself has explained, are multifaceted. Some of them are quite crazy. Some of them can be described as, okay, genuine, security concerns, whether one agrees with them or not. But I've described the NATO issue as 10 feet of bridge for 100 feet of chasm in trying to explain Putin's thinking, but it is there. Now, if some kind of security guarantee, such as what was discussed in Istanbul, and again, that's there are other issues with that potential agreement, but there was a non-NATO security commitment, as I understand it, in that agreement. I think could potentially be workable and would, if that is something that gives Putin a bridge or an off-ramp. And as distasteful as it is to, say that we need to give Putin anything, I just trying to speak pragmatically here about getting to that durable end to the war. I think we have to be thinking in those terms.
I do not think that there would be a durable end to the war with Putin, because the goals, for me at least, I think clearly genocidal.
Yeah.
And what's going on eastern Ukraine. Durable peace probably would mean capitulation for Ukraine or giving some lands, and on this lands happens just horrible war crimes. We know only part of them, and we see from the satellites new graveyards that are digging. So there are a lot of problems with possibility for durable peace, and it needs that there would be one place where interests of both sides align, and I don't think that this place exists. So unfortunately, I think the situation would be harsher, in my opinion. But I want to go more into the direction of US. And right now there's elections, and this election is crucial between practically a person who wants to establish dictatorial regime and has this Project 2025, and who are practically a criminal, and Democratic candidate. I want to ask how you're managing it. What are you doing right now, and how it emotionally feels, and just what's going on with elections, how you participate in this, how you agitate, and how you just hold together in this horrible and hard situation. And elections is extremely important, probably the most important elections for US in this century. So would you mind to tell about your experience? And again, this Tanya and then Matt.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really fraught, and it's not just this election cycle. It's been 8 years of really fraught election cycles, and I think the thing in this moment that is just really challenging, again, as a leftist, is the Democratic candidate is by no means a leftist, is by no means really standing up in many spaces for the policies that I believe in, and recognizing that the alternative in our really broken two-party system is a dictatorship and a complete loss of democracy. And so I think, I mean, I'm in Vermont, and because of the Electoral College, my personal vote doesn't matter that much. Vermont's probably one of the bluest states in the country. Our electoral votes, all three of them are going to go blue. And so I think there's a multifaceted sort of strategical way that I'm looking at this. In Vermont, I think that I can safely vote third party and try to get a third party, that 5% that allows them to have some more power on the national stage. But if I was in a swing state, I would view that very differently. But I also think, we need to vote to preserve our democracy now, while also long range agitating and really building a movement towards a better future that neither of the candidates is offering. And so it's been really challenging, because really it's this sort of lesser of two evils that's brought us here. It's when I look at this election cycle, and I look at the 2020 elections, and I look at the 2016 elections, what I see is each of those as a symptom of an underlying problem where people are not getting what they need, and people who are in pain and in despair are really easy to manipulate and fuel with rage and fuel with hatred, which has really, I mean, for decades, really longer than I've been alive, neither party has showed up for struggling people. And so I think that we're in a space where, yes, we absolutely need to vote to save democracy. And we need to be thinking beyond the 2024 elections, or we're going to be right back here with worse candidates. And so that's been really challenging for me to sit with, both in the election cycles, but also, within the different administrations, is what are we actually doing so that we don't just end up right back here? I mean, in 2020, I remember saying that. I remember saying, if the Biden administration doesn't tangibly make people's lives better, everyday people, like, we're going to be right back where we were in 2016, only it's going to be worse. And here we are. I hate it when those predictions that I have are correct, but I don't think that if we don't really look at the bigger picture in how we got here, and we don't look at these elections as symptoms of a bigger problem and not the problem themselves, then it's just going to keep going down this path, maybe a little slower, with Kamala in office, but it's still going to be going down this path towards fascism and dictatorship. So it's exhausting. It's terrifying. It's incredibly emotional. I mean, I find myself at many points along the way, not sure what to do, not sure how to acknowledge how incredibly complex and incredibly hard it is. I was at an event for Kamala not that long ago, and one of the things that I just kept hearing is this complete disregard for the despair that people are experiencing. It's really grounded in, like, oh, those people are just terrible and bad. It's like, well, no, those people have been weaponized. Their agony and their despair has been weaponized. And if we don't acknowledge that agony and despair, and we don't do something about it, then it's going to keep being weaponized.
Thank you, Tanya. Matt, what's your experience with elections right now? What do you think about what's going on and how they approach it?
Well, go ahead, Jared. You had something to say?
Well, also, I want to make sure that, same question, but as I know you have to go soon, what do you think is at stake?
Yeah.
Both for Ukraine, for US, for...
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with much of what Tanya said. As I've said also, I mean, I have strong disagreements with elements of the Biden administration's foreign policy. I'll say on domestic policy and in general, I think Biden has been an enormously successful progressive president. I think we've seen some really amazing legislation passed under Biden, in part because they have recognized, one of the lessons of 2016, Trump's victory, but also, the message that Bernie brought was that many, many Americans, far more than Washington appreciated, just think this system is not working. And that memo landed in 2016. And I do think part of what we've seen from the Biden administration, in a sense of, okay, the old neoliberal economic model was deeply flawed. We need to be investing in American communities. We need to be doing actual industrial policy and not just doing that through the military and the Pentagon, which is how we've been doing it for the past decade. I think those things are important and really, worth acknowledging. On foreign policy, as I said, it's been a much more of a mixed bag, to put it lightly. I mean, Gaza is just an era-defining catastrophe that is going to define this administration's foreign policy, even if they don't quite know it yet, and I think they don't. But yeah, we are faced with a binary choice here, and I know that is something people are tired of hearing, but that is the fact. One of these two choices is the better choice, and CIP is a C3 organization. We do not endorse candidates. But speaking personally, Kamala Harris is clearly the better choice. I would encourage people to go. I think one of the leaders who's really articulated in the best way is Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I would encourage people to go see what she's been saying at rallies publicly, because she engages, with her own constituency, which is largely left, but saying, our organizing is going to be better under one of these two choices. And that is under a Harris administration.
So what do you think at stakes in these elections?
What's at stake? I do think you mentioned Project 2025, but even just from things Trump and Vance have already said, I mean, they have a vision of this country that wants to empower a very specific subset of the population who they consider to be the real Americans. And I think this is something that is shared amongst kind of right-leaning, nationalist, populist, illiberal, authoritarian, movements around the world, whether we're looking at Orban in Hungary, whether we're looking at Putin himself, whether we're looking at, Netanyahu, Bolsonaro in Brazil. It's a sense that you have the real Americans and then you have the people whose citizenship is basically provisional. And it's only the real Americans who are should have full access and should determine the future of the country. It is frankly a deeply undemocratic approach, and I think they've been very, very clear about how they're going to kind of purge the bureaucracy, to remove people they see as unfaithful and not fully committed to the MAGA project. People can read, Project 2025 is a huge document, but just page through it, you'll certainly find something to frighten you.
And
But go ahead.
just before you go, what specifically do you think is at stake for Ukraine?
For Ukraine, again, part of what's the problem with Donald Trump is his unpredictability. But I think from what he has said, it's very possible he could come into office and just immediately say, all right, listen, we're cutting this off. Putin, let's figure this out. And to do exactly what Putin wants is for Russia and the United States to essentially determine the future of Ukraine. And I think this is where I think the Biden administration has been right. It's like, yes, we are supporting Ukraine. We have a role to play here, but ultimately it is for Ukraine to take the lead in determining that. This is not something for great powers to determine, to carve up smaller powers. And once again, I wish they would apply that same principle to Palestine, which they simply do not. But I think we would see, Trump just very much leaning into that. But the bottom line with Trump is, who knows? I mean, Trump will wake up one morning and think he heard an interesting idea on Fox News the night before and say, maybe let's do that. And it's precisely the fact that you don't know what he could do, which is going to cause everyone to hedge in preparation for what crazy thing he might tweet at 2 a.m.
So, Matt, last question before you go. More personal. How do you land on these positions? How do you decided that Ukraine was supporting? How do you decided that there is a need for power for the people, for social rights? How do you become progressive? What was kind of your life path to this, and how it led to what's going on right now? And also, how your views on Ukraine progressed? Like what you were thinking before the full-scale invasion, after, when you were advisor. So I want to ask about your path to become progressive, and why you decided that these ideas are what needed for US. And second, how this progressive identity influenced your opinion on Ukraine and how it changed.
He only has 3 minutes, so
minutes.
it may be hard to tackle all of that.
My
but do what you can.
And my worldview in 3 minutes. No, just again, to do it as brief as I can. Again, like I said, my father is a Ukrainian refugee. That meant a lot to me growing up. That was the community that I partly grew up in, and that was part of my understanding. And that lent itself kind of a global consciousness, especially growing up in the 1980s, the Cold War, the evil empire, understanding my own family's history in that context. My mom's family is from Western Pennsylvania. They're farmers and truckers who have had their own enormous struggles, and still today. And that also, I was clued in fairly early, even though I didn't understand it at a young age, of what deregulation and what the kind of neoliberalization of the economy meant for these working people who had seen their communities and their livelihoods made more and more difficult over the years, and how they reacted to that. And this is what I said about the memo that landed in 2016, is this economic approach is not working. And I think growing up, looking back, I could see evidence of that in various ways. So that's, part of my just personal history. Now, just growing up, I had an interest in the Middle East, in part growing up in the evangelical church, but also because I had very close friends with families in the region. I had a very close friend in high school whose family was from Iraq during the first Gulf War. I paid very close attention to that. And then, fast forwarding, to 9/11 and the global war on terror, which is where I started to really get engaged professionally, was just this idea that America can do so much better than we are doing. I mean, we are really committed to a set of principles and norms that should apply to everyone, recognizing there's always going to be tension, there's always going to be hypocrisy, there's always going to be some measure of double standard. You're never going to have perfect, consistency, but there's a lot we can do to diminish the hypocrisy that does exist in our foreign policy. And, just the last point I'll make is going back to what I said earlier, is introducing that concept of solidarity to, security, our security and prosperity. It's just, And this is, again, part of my being raised in the church, is just an understanding that every human being has value and we have obligations to each other. We're just not all in it for ourselves. And I feel like, a progressive worldview is one, I mean, at least as I understand it, reflects those values.
Well, thank you for joining us. I know you said
Yes,
you had to
thank
go,
you a
so
lot. It was a good speech.
Thank
Very emotional. I
you very
enjoyed
much.
it.
Well, no, I
Thank you
mean,
for your
I think
contributions and what you're doing.
thank you very much. And it's been a great pleasure to join you all, Senator. Really, really great to be on with you. And I look
forward to seeing you in Kyiv soon, Matt.
Hopefully.
Yeah, all of you. All of you.
All
Both
right.
Matt and Tanya. You're
All
going
right.
for the
Let's have a delegation.
Okay.
Let's
That's
do
great.
it.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
So I want to ask one thing for Tanya.
Yes.
In Ukraine, we have situations that practically have libertarian government that has neoliberal principles at its core, and you're a member of Vermont Progressive Party. What do you think are the possibilities to maybe exchange experience, maybe connect Vermont trade unions to Ukrainian trade unions somehow to educate and help of the battle of Ukrainian people for defending their social rights? Is there a possibility for some external cooperation, or Vermont progressives are right now focused only internally? Is there a possibility to create connections, exchange experience, and try to make this international anti-neoliberal struggle and support for the people? What do you think about that?
I mean, I think there's always possibilities for those connections. And I actually, my view is those connections are really critical. We, like it or not, live in a world that has become very globalized in a very, neoliberal way. And I think that by connecting to the international community and building international community is the only way we move forward in a way where people's rights are respected and people's needs are met. And that said, I imagine there are some spaces to build those connections and those experiences. And one of the challenges in the United States, and Vermont certainly isn't immune to this, although we're in a slightly better position, is, since the Reagan administration, the union participation is just incredibly low. And there's a lot of organizing internally right now to try to build union capacity. And I think that that's where a lot of that energy is really going. I think Vermont has slightly over the national average of union membership. I think we're at about 14%, and nationally it's about 11%. It's pretty sad. But I think there are places to make those connections and people for whom that they would really welcome that and want to do that. And it's some of the work that I've been trying to work on with the Ukrainian Solidarity Campaign is where are those spaces? And, as we said at the beginning, there's huge splits in those spaces. I've certainly had to walk away from some previously really productive relationships with certain union members because of this issue. And so yes, I think that possibility is there, and I think it has to be cultivated. I mean, this is part of, why I try to make I have family in lots of different places, being, my grandmother's from Hungary, my dad's from Ukraine, like we have family in all of these places, and we have these conversations a lot, but I've also had the incredible privilege of living abroad and traveling abroad. And so getting perspectives from outside of the United States. And whenever I do that, part of my goal is to make those connections and go meet union members and go meet members of the government.
Immediately, a question.
Yes.
Can we use you to spread the voice of Ukrainian trade unions and fight for the social rights internationally? I know a lot of people, a lot of trade union leaders who just need a voice and who aren't heard. What's going on in Ukraine, in media, it just doesn't represent the state of ordinary people, of people who are working, laboring people. And I think there need to be some support and exchange of experience, because we don't know how to organize progressive party. You organized the biggest third party practically in US, and we need that experience and we need this dialogue. So can we count on you for such things, or your party members? Oh, I love it. Thank you. It's so
everything I can from halfway across the world. So if there are ways that I can be helpful, please don't hesitate to reach out. If there are messages that I can lift up, please don't hesitate to reach out. Though I will say I didn't organize the Vermont Progressive Party. That happened before I was born. It was actually Bernie who had a huge role in organizing the Vermont Progressive Party. And those people are still here in Vermont, and I'm sure some of them would be really happy to talk about organizing, you know, a third party. And, you know, we are the most progressive third party in the United States, and we're very, very tiny. But yes, please ask me how I can help. And please, if there are places you see that I need to be plugging in or should be plugging in, it has felt profoundly hopeless for me to be this far away and feel like there's just nothing I can do. So not only do I want to for Ukraine, it actually will be fueling for me and make me feel like I'm doing something.
That's so great to hear. I think every
sorry.
Ukrainian that listens to podcast right now has like their heart warmer, and it's incredible. Thank you for this. And yeah, Jared, go with the question, and then I will another will be mine.
Yeah, then we can sort of wrap things up. But well, I want to say one thing, which is I think, and Vlad, the kind of rook you talked about is important because internationally there needs to be more voices representing Ukraine than just the president of Ukraine. Like we need to like do what we can to like uplift progressive voices, uplift alternative voices in Ukraine, and that's a challenge right now because there's not a lot of voices that are known. They exist. There's some brilliant writers and thinkers, and but getting them to break through the bubble, internationally. Yes, yes, including you. But Tanya, I wanted to something you said earlier really stuck with me because it was like a place that I really related to, which is just like feeling like, you know, worrying about people close to you. Like when I'm debating Ukraine with a Jill Stein voter, what I'm worried about in my mind is like, you know, I know how brutal, like if in my mind, it's possible, we don't know what's going to happen, but it's possible that a Trump election could result in the occupation of major cities or could put that on the table. And that is terrifying thought because we've seen what Russian occupation looks like. And that's, well, I'm not sure that that's always appreciated in the West, like the degree, even on the left, the degree to which the people that leftist people would normally relate to, activists, musicians, writers, they would be the first ones rounded up if they didn't flee. So that's like that. Because of that, I sometimes have trouble staying a little bit calm because I'm trying to get this through to people. But what does that look like for you? Like, what is it that you're worried about, and what is it that you hope for?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can relate to that difficulty sometimes staying calm. And you know, I am worried about the future of, you know, not Ukraine as a concept. I mean, yes, Ukraine is a concept, but my family, my friends, you know, it's so personal, and that makes it harder, I think, to sit in those conversations. But also, I think there's more profound change that can happen in those conversations. As a lot of times, and your point that you made about the West being sort of removed from what that would look like and what that would mean if there was an actual Russian occupation is very accurate. And I run into it on this conversation, but also a lot of progressive conversations, you know, in the State House when we're talking about things like minimum wage or housing. So many of my colleagues intellectually understand what that means and intellectually understand that, yeah, people don't make enough money, or intellectually understand, yeah, Russia shouldn't occupy Ukraine, but they don't have any personal connection to it. And so I think that what I hope for in the short term is exactly the question I was asked before, is how do we bring those personal voices? Because I think one of the most profound things that was said to me in my graduate program was in a statistics class. And I can't remember who I'm quoting, but the quote was that statistics are stories with the tears wiped away. And I think we have to tell those stories. I think people have to hear the real impact and not be intellectually thinking about what's happening. But my hope, my long-term hope, is for a free and sovereign progressive Ukraine that is self-determining and that is lifting up the regular everyday people. My hope for Ukraine is my hope for the United States. It's my hope for the world. And that is that we come to a space where people have their basic needs met and people don't have to worry about bombs falling from the sky and people don't have to worry that they can't put food on their table. And that for me is really what international solidarity is about, like looking at the issues that we're facing and working towards a world where people have what they need.
That's so great. It's kind of answers what I wanted to ask, and I want to bring two questions. First is how you how you become this progressive, how these ideals become close to your heart. Like what happened, how you decided that you want to be this, and went to politics and work for the people. And second one question is, what do you think would be ideal result? What do you want to see? Like what would be like progressive futures that you dream of? Like what is in your mind? Like what moves you forward in this? So first is how you decided to be progressive, how you found this, how you decided to go on this road, and the second one, what you think will be ideal end of this road. So
Yeah. So I think my pathway towards progressive policies, I think, was kind of complex. I mean, again, I had a lot of conversation that.
And how you decided to go into politics at all? Like,
yes, I'll get there too. I think I always really held progressive values. I think that's a lot of the conversations that I was having, with family, particularly family that lived outside of the U.S. and had seen other ways of doing things and other ways of taking care of people. But I grew up in a single parent working class home. I mean, really, probably it's more accurate to call it a poor home, and never saw myself represented, never saw myself. And I really didn't even see the people in positions of power fighting for families like mine. It was like we didn't even exist. And then I went into social services, and I spent a long time working with people experiencing chronic, being unhoused in a chronic manner for years at a time, and experiencing, people who didn't have access to healthcare. And I myself I was a community organizer for a long time. I cut my teeth on the healthcare as a human right campaign because I graduated college before the Affordable Care Act, and because of pre-existing conditions that I was born with was uninsurable. And so I just really think through my own personal experiences and my sort of global understanding that there's other ways to do what we're doing. I was always set up to have progressive policies. But again, what really got me into politics was starting to do my work with, it was that history. It was the 2016 election. And it was starting to have this sense that we needed people with that lived experience in those spaces, even though those spaces weren't made for those people. And that I was sitting in my practice working with clients who were experiencing systemic problems, and I was offering them individual Band-Aids. And then I found myself in the basement of a church in Middlebury with Senator Sanders. And he said to me, I hear you're going to run for office. And I said, I don't know. That's not for me. That's not where I belong. Like, I'm a community organizer. And he put his arm around me and he said, the fact that you don't see yourself represented there means you have to run. It's not a good reason not to. And so he really helped me, he and a couple of other progressives, our lieutenant governor and a few others, that sort of talked me into seeing the connection between community organizing and politics, and that I could have one foot in both worlds and actually create the most change. And Senator Sanders finally gave me that push over the edge, really saying, you're right, you're not represented there. Go represent yourself. And so that's really how I've tried to be in office. Really, some of the big wins that we have had, and I mean, they're not really wins. We didn't lose more, but they have been things that people told me were impossible, but weren't impossible because I have one foot in each world, because I'm not playing politics as the game is usually played. I am there as a community organizer, and I'm there with the people that I represent, and there to open the door so that their voices are heard. It's really shifted sort of what is possible. And so, when I think globally more about what is my hope is that there are more organizers that run for office, that we support each other. And because it's also really lonely. It's really lonely to sometimes be the only one voting no, or the only one arguing for these things. And so we need more of us so that we can really build a world that I know is possible.
I want to connect two things. How does your Ukrainian identity fit into your identity as a progressive and as a leader?
What you're saying actually so close to me, it just rings. Thank you a lot for this.
Yeah. I mean, it is a part of my identity. It is inexorably linked with everything else that I do. And there are points and times, again, particularly in leftist spaces in the United States right now, where that's really hard and really painful. But I'm not going to hide that aspect of my identity. I really, we're all so complex and multifaceted. And there are certainly, I think there are spaces where that's not the part of my identity that is front and center, but it is still part of my identity. And it's still something that I am going to talk about. It's still something that I am going to name. And I do think that you're absolutely right. And that just like, I have seen my role in the State House in Vermont is to open the door for the regular people to talk for themselves and not the commissioner of this or the secretary of that. We have to do the same internationally in creating that space for the regular people to talk for themselves. So again, I think they're inexorably linked. And I have been very open and straightforward, and I think there's a Wikipedia page that names right up top that I have Ukrainian heritage, and it wasn't actually something that I grew up really talking about as much. My dad's family history and his mom's history is challenging and complex, and it was only later in my life that my grandmother really started to open up about some of these stories. I don't know if she thought it wasn't appropriate to talk about with children, or yes, we ate Ukrainian food on holidays, but it wasn't as foundational as it sounds like it was for Matt. That wasn't the community I grew up in, but I found that community again, and it's critically important to me.
Thank you, Tanya. And I want probably to have final words. And my final words that I wish that we will work and put all our energy to build a socially progressive world in US, in Ukraine. So the people would be in charge. It would be a democratic world where just regular, normal people without much money and prestige, yachts, can have a voice and can have their rights defended, including social and economic rights. I think that's my vision and your vision, and I hope we would work to strive to build this vision. And I want to go that I want right now, so Jared would say final words, and then you, and we will close the podcast. It was great. So go.
I won't say much other than I agree that I want to live in a world where universal solidarity means something. And I think that's the point of view that we're sort of all rooted in as we're talking. But Tanya, I want to let you close. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's so important to be having these conversations, and like both of you, I want to live in a world where universal solidarity means something, and people's humanity is respected and celebrated. And I think that it is through conversations like this and through these global connections. And again, for me, what I see as where I know in the United States and in Vermont, we are struggling is in the fraying of community. And I think community spreads globally, and that it is through these conversations that each of us gets to be a part in building a world where universal solidarity means something.
Well, thank you. I think that's a good note to end on, if everyone's okay with that.
Okay. Thank you. It was very warm and pleasing podcast, and I got more energy from this. Even speaking an hour here, I'm feeling more energetic and less tired after this. It was really motivational. It brings the energy, just by sharing your thoughts, your experience. It empowers other progressives, empowers other people in the same situation who feel the same and want the same. And I think we have a lot in common, progressives in US, progressives in Ukraine, and just by speaking, it empowers us, it gives us energy, and thank you a lot for this. And I hope it wouldn't be last time that we meet. I don't know if you're drinking, but if you're drinking, I am inviting you for a wine in Kyiv. If you're not, I'm invited for the best tea in Kyiv with Ukrainian food, and I hope you would come as a senator here to Ukraine, and we will show you this great country. And we will work together for a socially progressive world everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to coming and to the wine. I've had a little bit of Ukrainian wine, and it's quite good.